The Storyteller presents Snow White.
Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, there lived a beautiful queen. She sat by the open window one day and looked out over the snow. She was sewing and cut her finger, and a drop of blood fell on the white snow.
When I have a daughter, I wish for her to have lips as red as blood, skin as white as snow, and hair as black as a raven.
Soon thereafter, a baby girl was born, and she named her Snow White. Alas, the young queen did not recover after her baby was born. The king was very sad. He had to look for another queen to help him rule the kingdom. After many years of searching, the king married a new queen. She was quite beautiful, but very selfish. She made Snow White do all the hard work, and she spent many hours in her room trying to make herself more beautiful. She had an enchanted mirror which would always answer her questions truthfully. "Magic mirror, mirror dear, who's the loveliest lady here?"
Dearest Queen, brightest star, you are the most beautiful by far.
The years passed, and Snow White became a very beautiful young lady. Her dead mother's wish had come true. Then, one sunny morning, when the queen asked her mirror who was the loveliest, the mirror replied,
Dearest Queen, I'll tell you true. Snow White is much lovelier than you.
This made the queen very angry. At once, she began to plan to do away with Snow White. She called one of the servants. "Take Snow White into the woods and put her to death."
"But, Your Majesty." "Yes, Your Majesty."
The servant took Snow White deep into the forest. But he loved his little princess so much that he decided to disobey the queen and let Snow White go.
"Little princess, I cannot harm you. You must flee far away from here, or the queen will surely find you."
Snow White nodded gratefully.
"Thank you, kind servant. I will never forget you."
The servant went back to the castle and told the queen that Snow White was dead. Meanwhile, Snow White wandered through the forest. The birds and animals were trying to be friendly to her, but she was so afraid of the trees that seemed to be trying to catch her that she started running as fast as she could. Suddenly, she came to a clearing in the woods, and there stood a pretty little house. It was so small that when Snow White tried to go inside, she had to bend down to get through the door. When she was inside, she said,
"Oh, this little house is very dirty. It seems there are 7 of everything. It looks as though 7 dirty little boys live here."
She wanted to help them and quickly cleaned up the entire house until everything was bright and shiny. Then she felt very tired and went upstairs. She laid across 3 of the little beds, fell into a deep sleep, and little birds came in and covered her. Soon evening fell, and the owners of the little house came home. They were 7 little men in overalls and funny little hats.
"Oh, look, how clean it is.
Somebody's been here."
Maybe they're still here."
They suddenly became very quiet and listened. Just then, Snow White moved in her sleep. The dwarfs looked at each other and whispered,
It's still here.
Upstairs.
You go and see. No, you go.
Finally, they decided to go up, and they found Snow White fast asleep. Their whispers woke her, and she smiled at them.
"Hello."
They had never seen anyone so beautiful in their lives, and they all tried to talk at once.
What's your name?
Will you stay? Of course I'll stay. And I will keep house for you and look after you.
So Snow White stayed for a long time in the little dwarf's house. They were very happy. Back at the castle, the queen was sure that Snow White was dead, and she again asked her mirror who was the loveliest in the land. The mirror replied,
Snow White is still much lovelier than you.
Knowing that the servant had betrayed her, she became very angry and decided to get rid of Snow White herself. I will disguise myself as an old woman and take a poisoned apple with me. Soon she found herself in the woods on her way to see Snow White. Each morning, as the dwarfs set out to go to work, they would warn Snow White.
Do not open the door to anyone. And do not speak to anyone.
She promised to be careful. In the middle of the morning, as Snow White was doing her chores, there came a knock on the door. She looked out the window and saw an old lady standing there. Dear girl, please let me in and give an old woman a drink of water. I feel very faint. Snow White was so kind that she forgot all about the warnings the dwarfs had given her. She opened the door and gave the woman a glass of water. Thank you, my dear, and here is a nice apple for you.
Oh, but I shouldn't have...
Nonsense, my dear. It will taste good. Suddenly, the birds flew all around the old woman, trying to chase her away. But Snow White did not understand their warning. She shooed them away and bit into the apple. At that moment, she fell to the floor as if she were dead. All that anyone could hear was the cackle of the old woman's laugh.
I did it!
The dwarfs were warned by the forest animals and birds that something was wrong, and they rushed home and found Snow White. Being unable to wake her, they made her a glass case, put her in it, and surrounded it with flowers. The poor little men cried now that their lovely Snow White was no longer with them. One day, a handsome young prince rode through the forest on a white horse. He came upon the little men and their Snow White, who was lying there as beautiful as ever. Tearfully, the dwarfs told the prince the story of Snow White. The prince was sad, but thought her so beautiful that he lifted the lid of the glass case and gently kissed her. All at once, Snow White opened her eyes and smiled. Everyone was so happy. The prince asked the oldest dwarf,
May I please marry your beautiful Snow White? You are all welcome to live in my land and come to the wedding.
If you love her, your highness, and we know you do, because you awakened her with your kiss, you may have her hand in marriage.
All the dwarfs cheered.
Hooray!
The prince lifted Snow White on his horse, and they rode off to his kingdom and lived happily ever after.